Good evening, and welcome to the October 2018 edition of League of Women Voters Presents, the monthly public affairs show about issues that are important to mid-Missouri and beyond. My name's Randy Picht. I'm your host. I'm the executive director of the Donald W. Reynolds Journalism Institute at the Missouri School of Journalism. And tonight we're going to be talking about the election that's coming up. I guess it's about 4 weeks away now, and becoming something that everybody's talking about, from Taylor Swift to, of course, President Trump. So we've invited two experts in local politics to give us their insights into this year's election here in mid-Missouri. It's an election that will have kind of the usual suspects, but it also has kind of a wide range of subjects and some oddities too. So we have a lot to talk about tonight, and so we're going to try not to talk too fast so you can understand us, but we're going to cover a lot of ground. So put on your seatbelts, and here we go. So with me tonight is Scott Swafford.
Hi, Randy.
Hi, he's the public life editor at the Missourian, and Mark Horvit, who is the state government editor for the Missourian, and they've been paying careful attention to all the things going on with the ballot, and so we're going to get started. And I have brought my League of Women Voters guide to help me navigate this. So let's get started, guys. Are you ready?
Ready.
So I thought first we'd start in the back of the book here, and we'd talk about the statewide ballot issues, because there's lots of them.
Sure.
So why don't we start with Amendment 1,
Okay.
which is Clean Up Missouri Politics. Mark?
Sure. So yeah, Amendment 1, Clean Missouri, has a lot of elements to it, and you can sort of break it down into three broad categories. The first one, which is the biggest, would change the way redistricting happens in Missouri. And it would basically, there is a position of state demographer. Most people are not aware of that, but it exists. And that state demographer would be empowered through this process. There would be a process for selecting the position, and that person would be empowered with redrawing boundaries. And this happens every 10 years. Whenever new census information comes out from the federal government, states all over the country redraw their boundaries for both Congress and for the State House. And that's, in most places, a fairly politicized process is the complaint. Whichever party happens to be in power typically has the upper hand in drawing those lines. And so there have been various efforts all around the country in finding other ways to do that. This is a proposed different way to do it in Missouri. There's debate about whether it would actually depoliticize the process or not. But the idea is this state demographer redraws the lines. It would go then to a committee picked by lawmakers, but of citizens from districts around the state, who would review that, and those lines would then go into effect. It's based in part, I believe, on a system in Iowa, but there's really not too many other states that have adopted a proposal like what's been proposed here in Missouri yet. So this is probably the part of Clean Missouri that's gotten the most attention from people both in favor and against.
Okay.
Then the next section of the Clean Missouri Amendment, Amendment 1, deals with money for state lawmakers. It creates new limits for campaign contributions for State House and State Senate. They're only slightly lower than the current limits, but they'd also be put into the state constitution, which gives them sort of a new power. And then there's lobbying limits. For several years now, members of the State House, the General Assembly, have declined to adopt lobbying limits, so they've been debated over and over and over again. So part of what Clean Missouri does what lawmakers haven't yet been willing to do, and puts in pretty strict lobbying limits of $5 that lobbyists could spend for candidates. The argument against that among some lawmakers is that lawmakers who go down to Missouri some of them don't have a lot of income on their own. They have a lot of requirements and obligations where they need to meet with people, and so they say if someone wants to buy dinner, it just makes it possible for me to hold more meetings with people. People opposed say nobody should be able to buy access in any way, shape, or form. and money shouldn't be part of the process. So that argument. And then the third piece does something that I think most Missourians probably don't even know doesn't already exist, which applies our Sunshine Law to the General Assembly, to the members of the State House and Senate. Right now, the law doesn't apply, though it applies to all other government officials. And what that would mean is if you wanted to get documents from lawmakers, if you wanted to request their emails, you can get those now if they want to give them to you, but they don't have to. Where that does apply to other officials at local government and other state agencies. This would extend the Sunshine Law to specifically apply to state lawmakers as well.
That's a lot.
It is. It is.
But so that's Amendment 1. And then we have 3. This is kind of where it gets a little odd or unusual. We have 3 different ballot issues around legalizing medical marijuana.
Right.
And not only do we have 3, but one's Amendment 2, one's Proposition C, and what's the other
Amendment
one?
3.
And Amendment 3. So you kind of have a mix of amendments and propositions, but they all have to do with medical marijuana.
Right.
And so let's talk about the key differences there.
Sure, absolutely. So the first thing to know is that, as Randy, as you said, 2 are amendments, which means they change the state constitution.
Okay.
The third, Proposition C, becomes state law. The difference there is that if you create a law, lawmakers could go back and change it and modify it later. If you pass a constitutional amendment, only the voters can go back and change it through the same process down the road. Otherwise, all 3 of the pieces of all 3 of the proposals basically do the same thing more or less on the medical side of things. All 3 of them apply to a fairly limited range of medical conditions that it would be possible to get medical marijuana prescribed for, and those lists are fairly similar. Where the differences come is how they'd be taxed, how much money they'd raised, and what that money could go to. I'm going to refer to my notes so I don't screw this up because I have not memorized all 3 of the medical marijuana. So Amendment 2 is more popularly known as New Approach Missouri, and that's a constitutional amendment. It would tax marijuana medical marijuana at 4%, generating about $24 million a year is the estimate for the state. That would be overseen by the State Department of Health and Senior Services, and the money goes to veterans, a fund for veterans health care. So that's New Approach Missouri. Amendment 3, also called Find the Cures, has the highest tax of the bunch at 15%, but then also generates about $66 million a year estimated. This one is the most different of the 3 in that it creates an entire new piece of government to oversee medical marijuana, something called the Biomedical Research and Drug Development Institute, that would be created. They would be able to buy land, they'd build a new institute, and it would do research on illnesses. And the Constitution actually states that the gentleman who's proposed the bill would be the head of that, and that's actually in the Constitution, which is a little unusual as well. The money for this then would go towards the new research as opposed to existing state agencies or efforts. The third, Proposition C, Missourians for Patient Care, is the statutory solution. Again, that's the one that would be a law as opposed to a constitutional amendment. It would be overseen by the Department of Health and Senior Services, like Amendment 2, and also by the Division of Alcohol and Tobacco Control. And it proposes sending money to 4 existing areas: early childhood, veterans, public safety, and drug rehabilitation. So I know that's a lot to take in, but basically the difference is the amount of tax, which ranges from 2% in Prop C to 15% in Amendment 3, and where the money goes. Veterans for Amendment 2, veterans, early childhood programs, public safety and drug rehab in Proposition C, and in Amendment 3 to a new institute focusing on medical research.
Right. And I think the Proposition C that changes the state law, the argument is it gives the legislators the ability to change things as issues come up.
Right.
But another side argues they also could change things and divert the money, do all kinds of things that we don't want.
It's a less permanent solution,
Right.
because it's up to it allows lawmakers more latitude for better or worse depending on your perspective.
Exactly. Well put. Well said. Okay, so we're not done with the ballot issues yet.
No, we're
not. So let's talk about the minimum wage increase.
All right, sure.
Proposition B.
Yeah, minimum wage is Proposition B, meaning it's again a state law as opposed to a constitutional amendment. And this one is more straightforward. What it would do is over a period of time increase Missouri's minimum wage, which is a little under $8 an hour right now, and it would raise it ultimately by the year 2023 to $12 an hour. It would go up annually in increments of 85 cents a year until it reaches that amount. And that's really, it doesn't apply to government agencies. It would apply to private business. And it would create some penalties for those who don't follow the law. But the basic idea is if you support increasing minimum wage, it would increase it about 85 cents a year until it reaches $12.
Right. So if you support that, vote yes. If you don't, vote no.
Right.
Easy.
Right.
Easy. Okay.
Easier. Yeah.
Easier. Now, let's skip to Proposition D, which is maybe hopefully equally as easy, the fuel tax increase.
Right. Scott?
Yeah. This one's pretty easy, although it does have three discrete components. The first is obviously the actual fuel tax increase, which would be a 10-cent increase phased in over 2.5 cents, over 4 years, 2.5 cents per year. So if you're going to go pump 20 gallons worth of gas, this is going to cost you about 50 cents the first year and ratchet up to an extra $2 4 years from now. So the money would go ostensibly to state highway and road projects, bridge projects, but voters might be confused when they see the ballot language because it actually says that a big chunk of this money would go to the state road fund for law enforcement purposes. So there's going to be a money shuffle if this gets approved. There's $288 million that the Highway Patrol is getting now for law enforcement that would now come from a different source, and that money they're getting now would then be freed up for road and bridge projects. So there's a little bit of a shuffle going on there. I'm not sure exactly why they decided to word it that way. So the bottom line is Missourians for years have opposed gas tax increases, so the legislature is trying again and trying to make the case, the advocates for this are trying to make the case that our roads and bridges are continuing to deteriorate. We're getting so far behind that this increase is absolutely necessary. It'll be up to the voters to decide if that's true. There are a couple different parts of this also, though. There's a provision that would create the state highway or the state freight bottleneck fund, which would create a pool of money for big, huge, expensive projects in excess of $50 million that would be intended to solve bottlenecks that are impeding the flow of freight across our state. Now, here in Columbia, we know probably one of the biggest bottlenecks in the country is US 63 I-70. And they have said that that would be one project that would probably be targeted by this. They don't yet have cost estimates or designs for that project yet, and it would certainly be years down the road. But that's another aspect of Proposition D that's on there. And then there's this weird little thing that actually was the genesis for Proposition D that everything else got attached to. I hope you're not an Olympic medalist because, or going forward that you don't win an Olympic medal, because right now that's subject to tax. Income tax. This measure has a provision pretty much unrelated to highways or roads that would exempt from state income tax any prize money or the value of a gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal that you win in the Olympics. So be careful out there.
That's good. That's what we've needed for a long time.
That's right.
All right.
And we are working at the Missourian right now to figure out what the impact of that truly would be.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the fuel tax increase. We have voted on this before.
We have. The last time it was increased was 1996. And I know we voted at least once, maybe twice on gas taxes. I forgot to look that up. But the last time that they put a gas tax on the statewide ballot, it failed miserably. So we'll see if voters have changed their minds.
What happens?
One difference the legislature's hoping is that because a lot of lawmakers from both parties are behind the effort this time, they're hoping that might help get it over the hump.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll have to watch that. And finally, real quickly, there's Amendment 4, which has to do with bingo.
Yes.
Everybody loves bingo, so
Right.
what does
That's
this
exactly
do?
right. So it's not a lot, unless I'm missing something, which I concede is entirely possible. Basically, right now, the Constitution actually has regulations about bingo games, and they state that if you want to run a game, you have to have been involved with the game for 2 years. This would lower that time period to 6 months. making it, frankly, I think, easier for organizations that run bingo games to find people who can literally run the game.
Right.
And the reason this has to go to all voters is because it was originally enshrined in the Constitution, and the only way to change that is to go back to voters.
Huh? Okay. All right, so those are, everybody in the state's going to get to vote for those, right? And then there's another election that everybody probably has heard about that we're going to talk about last, that everybody in the state will get to vote on, which is the U.S. Senate race. But so in the middle of the sandwich there, the statewide sandwich, let's talk about some of the county races.
Sure.
And I have here the Boone County Recorder of Deeds.
Yeah, that's an interesting race in that it's a rematch of the same two candidates who ran 4 years ago. We have Democrat Nora Dietzel and Republican Lisa Ballinger, who 4 years ago, both of them were deputy recorders who had worked in that office for many years, and they were competing to replace Betty Johnson, who was a recorder of deeds for more than 30 years. So you had two co-workers working in the same office running against each other for the opportunity to succeed their boss. Nora Dietzel came out the winner in that one. And now here we are 4 years later, Lisa Ballinger, who still works in the office, is challenging Ms. Dietzel, who is now her boss.
Huh.
So that makes it kind of interesting. She has, when she filed, she said that she doesn't believe Ms. Dietzel spends enough time at the office. Ms. Dietzel obviously refutes that and says she has travel and does a lot of work from home. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, all right. A rematch is always interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the Boone County Clerk, Taylor Burks against Brianna Lennon.
Yeah, so Taylor Burks is the incumbent. He's a Republican. He was appointed to that position in 2017 after Wendy Noren, who was a longtime clerk, very popular, resigned due to illness and has since passed away. But Taylor Burks, Governor Greitens appointed him to that job, and so he's been doing it for a year and a half or so. He has tried to emphasize the need to update election equipment in that office. He's tried to improve the way they report election results in terms of online precinct-by-precinct results. And he faces a challenge from Brianna Lennon, who is a Democrat. She ran for Southern District Commissioner 2 years ago, but lost to Fred Perry. She is former Assistant Attorney General. She ran the Election Integrity Unit for the Missouri Secretary of State for quite some time. So she is now trying to take a run at that job. So
Yeah.
That's a very interesting race.
And they're both 32 years old,
Is that right?
Yeah.
They're very young.
according to my guide here.
It used to be that the candidates I covered were younger than me, but that's not the case anymore.
It's getting harder and harder every
That's
year.
right.
So, yeah.
It's not going to get any
No,
better.
no, it's,
All
no,
right.
it's not.
Did I say younger? I meant older.
Yeah.
How about the Boone County Presiding Commissioner? What do we need to know about that?
Well, the two candidates are the incumbent, Dan Atwill, he's a Democrat, and the challenger is Matt Kavanaugh, a Republican, who he also ran for the Republican nomination for Southern District Commissioner 2 years ago, but Fred Perry beat him out. So Dan Atwill, he was appointed to that job, I believe in 2011, when Presiding Commissioner Ed Robb died while in office, and he has been elected a couple of times to that position since. He's a champion of trying to save money on the way they maintain the county's roads. He cites a lot of accomplishments that have happened under his watch, the use of Chapter 100 bonds to bring American Outdoor Brands and Northwest Medical Isotopes to town, voter approval of a couple of different sales taxes, one to establish this Children's Mental Health Fund that's generating millions of dollars a year, and another to build and operate a new 911 and emergency management center. Mr. Kavanaugh is an entrepreneur, a developer. He's renovated quite a few properties in town and used to run a resort in Honduras and was involved in resort development in Central America. He's quite unhappy with the management of Boone Hospital Center, which I should also say this is one reason Mr. Atwill wants to seek another term, is because he's been involved with the trustees in trying to figure out what the future management of Boone Hospital Center is going to look like. Mr. Kavanaugh is not happy with the way the hospital has been managed and has been highly critical of Mr. Atwill about that and other things. And he says that He doesn't believe the hospital should merge with MU Healthcare, but he also doesn't believe they should go it alone. They're going to have to find a different option. And he also, some of his other issues, he's not in favor of federal environmental regulations, and he wants to see us invest more in schools. Whether he can find a way for the county to get involved on those two issues remains to be seen.
All right, that's good. Let's go to the state reps, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
It's fine.
And we can.
There are a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. So we'll just go in numerical order with 44th District.
Yeah, so the 44th, for those who don't know, covers a chunk of northeast Columbia, and then northeastern Boone County, and then a little sliver of southeastern Randolph County. So the representative there right now is Sherry Tolson Reich. She is a former mayor and city clerk of Hallsville. She's finishing out her first term and is seeking a second one. She actually ran for Boone County Collector in 2014. And the Democrat there is a newcomer on the political scene. Her name is Marin Bell Jones. She is a veterinarian who has a private practice where she actually goes to people's homes to care for their pets. So she's taken a stab at getting into politics by going after Ms. Reich.
All right, and then how about the 46th District?
Well, it's real quick. Let's just do the 45th quickly, just so people don't think we're forgetting it.
Okay.
The 45th District is a big part of Columbia. Kip Kendrick is the Democrat incumbent, and he doesn't face any challengers. He's in the Democratic leadership, which is the minority leadership in the House, and he'll be going back whether you vote for him or not.
Okay. All right, and so the 46th is Martha Stevens against Kathy Richards. That's a rematch, isn't it?
Yeah, and there is a third-party candidate there,
Oh.
too, Green Party candidate Bill Hastings. So, yes, that is a rematch, but it's a little bit different because this time Kathy Richards, last time she ran as a Democrat in the primary and lost to Martha Stevens. This time around she's running as a Republican. She has said that she kind of did some soul searching and just thought that the Democratic Party had changed enough that her values align more closely with moderate Republicans. So she's running again. And Martha Stevens is going for her second term. She's a big advocate of Medicaid expansion, investing in education. Whereas Kathy, again, she's also said that she would be a champion for the university and education funding. Where she stands on health care as a Republican candidate, I'm not quite sure. Then you have Bill Hastings, who is taking advantage of the fact that the Green Party has ballot status in the state. And he, I've done a little research on him, haven't talked to him yet, but has a doctorate in psychology and apparently used to teach at a small liberal arts school, a Christian school in Illinois. He wants to roll back military spending. He says we're spending way too much on that kind of thing, and increase taxes on the wealthy to better fund health care and transportation. So we'll see how that message resonates. The 46th District is much of west central Columbia. So
And it's all contained.
it's all within the city
Right,
limits of
yeah.
Columbia. Yeah.
Okay. All right, the 47th District.
Yeah, you want to take
That's
that
all
one?
right.
Rick?
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. 47th is, it takes in a pretty good chunk of northwestern Boone County and then parts of Cooper, Howard, and Randolph counties. So even though it takes in some of Columbia, it's pretty much decidedly a rural district. Chuck Basie is the Republican incumbent. He's seeking his third term there. He knocked off Democrat John Wright several elections ago. And John Wright was considered a very popular Democrat, but Chuck Basie was able to knock him out of office. And Chuck Basie has faced a different challenger each time. He runs a small farm over near Roachport. He will be challenged by Democrat Adrian Plank, who's a former carpenter. He owned a business where they would go out and install granite in motels, and he blames the recession for putting him out of business. So probably the biggest difference between these two is where they stand on right-to-work legislation. Chuck Basie has voted for right-to-work legislation on several occasions, and Mr. Plank is just dead set against it. So.
All right. How about the 50th District?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Sure.
Sure.
It's, so the 50th is southern Boone County and then parts of Cooper, Cole, and Montauk County, and this is yet another rematch. This seat was filled by Republican Sarah Walsh last year in a special election after Caleb Jones, who had represented the area, was appointed by Governor Greitens, he went into Governor Greitens' administration, so the seat became open. And Sarah Walsh sort of defeated in a fairly close race Michaela Skelton, the Democrat. So she's from Hartsburg, Sarah Walsh is from Ashland, and once again they're going to face each other 1 year after doing so. Sarah Walsh is she's been active in Republican politics for a number of years, worked for the Pharmacy Association, several other associations, and Michaela Skelton is a former lawyer for the Missouri Senate, where she was involved in drafting legislation. So both of them have sort of longer political careers than this election would sort of show for the amount of time they've spent in office.
So the 50th district is all of southern Boone County, and then parts of Cooper, Montauk, and Cole counties.
Okay. All right, so we're running short on time. Let's talk about the judges, kind of in a maybe lightning round.
Yeah.
Audition.
We have 2 county judge positions that are up for election. One is, let's see, the circuit. I want to make sure I get these right. The circuit judge position is a contest between Republican Brock Jacobs, who was appointed to that position last year to replace Christine Carpenter, who retired, and he's facing a challenge from Finley Finley Gibbs. He's a private practice attorney who took a stab at running for circuit judge 4 years ago in a primary, but didn't quite make it. So he's taken another crack at winning the job on the bench. And then you have in associate circuit judge race, Josh Devine, another Republican who was appointed to that position when Debbie Daniels retired, is facing a challenge from Stephanie Morrell. She's an assistant prosecutor who won the primary against Kevin O'Brien. So.
And do you have how do people decide who to vote for?
Well, it's kind of tough. I think a lot of it boils down to experience, because in a judge campaign, they're fairly restricted in what they can do as candidates for judge positions. They're not allowed to criticize each other. They're not allowed to make political promises. They're not allowed to state definitively how they would rule in particular cases. So it really comes down to, hey, I've got a lot of experience, I'm going to be fair.
Right.
How do you decide? I guess you look into their backgrounds, maybe see if you really want to go deep and find out some cases for which they've represented clients or prosecuted people. You could also go to their websites, read a little bit more than we can give you here about their biographies, their backgrounds, their values, that kind of thing.
That's true. That's a good idea. All right.
And read the Missourian, because we'll be doing profiles on them.
That's good too. Always great suggestion. All right. So there's every 2 years the entire House of Representatives in Washington gets reelected, and we have Vicki Hartzler, who's been our representative for
4 terms. She's seeking her 5th term.
And she's opposed by Renee Hoganson.
Mm-hmm.
Who
Yeah,
is she?
Renee is a Columbia woman. She's been involved in magazine, newspaper, radio, even some television. I think she's probably giving Ms. Hartzler her stiffest challenge since the first time Vicki ran for this position. Ms. Hoganson seems very serious about this challenge. So we'll see how that plays out. It's very difficult for a Democrat in this district because of the way it's drawn. I'm shooting from the hip here. So I believe it's like 27 counties, and most of them are rural western Missouri counties, and Boone County is one of the easternmost counties in this district. It's hard for a Democrat to win here. We'll see if Ms. Hoganson can do that.
Okay, and let's try to squeeze in the Missouri State Auditor, because
And I ought to mention that there is a third-party candidate
Yep.
in the
Mark Bliss.
Mark Bliss.
Yep.
He is from Warrensburg. He's an adjunct professor over there. Not campaigning really energetically, but another candidate who just wants to keep his party on the ballot, I think.
Yeah, and you'll see his name on the ballot.
Yeah.
So Nicole Galloway is the incumbent, and she's facing off against Sandra McDowell.
Yeah, in
and
the state auditor's
Sandra-
race, and there are some third-party candidates there. This is the first time Nicole Galloway will actually face election. She was appointed when she was Boone County Treasurer. She was appointed to that job. Then she was appointed auditor after the unfortunate death of Tom Schweik, her predecessor. So this is the first time she's actually had to go out and campaign for her job. She's a certified public accountant. She's been doing this job, I guess, for 2 years now. And then you have Sandra McDowell, who's a former Assistant Attorney General, and now works in the Secretary of State's office. Can't remember the exact title of her position, but she's all there to eradicate fraud and abuse, and that's what she says she would do if she were auditor. And then the third-party candidates
Sean
thinking
O'Toole.
too fast here.
Sean O'Toole is a libertarian.
Yeah. Sean O'Toole has run for statewide office several times. He's a Kansas City guy, an independent trader. Ran for treasurer in 2012, auditor in 2014. So he's taken another crack at it. Don Fitz is a very interesting man from St. Louis who ran for governor 2 years ago. He has some really interesting ideas. He wants to audit the state, the financial relationship between the state and agricultural companies like Monsanto, energy companies like Ameren. He wants to audit the cost of the death penalty, and he wants to audit how much of our Medicaid dollars are going toward administration and insurance companies as opposed to actual care. And then you have Jacob Lukemeyer with the Constitution Party. He's a Columbia guy, or actually lives in California but works at IBM here in Columbia. And he has a very broad message of restoring accountability in state government. So.
All right. Wow, that was quite a tour. I mean, and finally we have Claire McCaskill and Josh Hawley. You guys have probably heard a lot about them, and you probably will continue. Do you want to, wrap it up with anything about them?
Well, I'll be honest and say that at the Missourian we don't go quite as in depth on a federal race like U.S. Senate as we do on more of these things that are a little bit more local. But obviously, McCaskill versus Hawley is one of the most closely watched Senate races in the country because a lot of people think Josh Hawley has a very good chance of gaining a seat for the Republicans there. The tone of that campaign, it is what it is. Sure would like to hear more about issues than we do just the back and forth critiques. There are some third-party candidates there as well. You have Libertarian Japheth Campbell from Springfield. He's a former minister with the Assemblies of God who now works in information technology. He has this really interesting idea where he would let Congress put a budget together, but then when you file your federal income tax returns every year, you would have a part of that form where you would indicate what percentage of the federal budget should be spent in which categories. And that would be binding. The results of that would be binding, which I thought was pretty interesting. Then you have Jo Crane. She's with the Green Party, a big advocate of protests as a form of dissent, and she's all about demilitarization and that sort of thing. And then an independent candidate, Craig O'Dear, who grew up on a farm in northeast Missouri. He's about environmental protections and says his priority, infrastructure-wise, would be rural broadband. So even though you've got McCaskill and Hawley, who obviously are the front runners in this race, it's kind of interesting to see what these third-party folks are all about as well.
All right. Well, that's terrific. So I couldn't have done the show without this voter's guide that is available on the League of Women Voters website, which is lwvmissouri.org. I don't know. I don't think you can zoom in on that. And lwvcbc.org. So you can go there and download this, and then you can have it to study up for the election in 4 weeks. And also, the Missourian will have a great guide that they do every time before the election, and that's going to come out.
That will come out Sunday, November 4th in the print edition, and we hope to have as much of that as possible online before that.
Yep. So anyway, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching, and good luck on Election Day.